2 American soldiers did not come home from Jordan this weekend. A third is still missing. And in under 72 hours, the war that killed them spread from 1 country to 4. This is the 8th consecutive night that American forces have struck targets inside Iran. Central Command says the strikes hit Iranian coastal surveillance sites, air defense facilities, and storage locations for missiles and drones. The stated goal is to degrade Iran's ability to threaten shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, one of the busiest oil corridors on the planet, and to answer directly for the American deaths in Jordan 2 days earlier. Here is exactly what CENTCOM has confirmed. On Friday, July 17th, Iranian ballistic missiles struck the Muwaffaq Salti Air Base in Jordan, a facility that hosts American troops and aircraft. 2 U.S. service members were killed in action while defending against the attack. 1 remains missing. 4 others were medically evacuated to hospitals in Jordan. 2 have since been discharged. Central Command says this is the first time American forces have been killed by direct Iranian fire since the opening weeks of this war back in March, which is exactly why the U.S. response came so fast and hit hard. Iran did not stay quiet either. Its military launched a wave of kamikaze drones at 2 American-linked bases in Kuwait, hitting an ammunition depot at Camp Udairi, and a radar system tied to Patriot air defenses at Ali al-Salem Air Base. Kuwaiti authorities confirmed sirens sounded across parts of the country as air defenses tried to intercept incoming drones and missiles. A fire broke out at a power and desalination plant, forcing several generation units offline while crews worked to contain it. Operations at Kuwait International Airport were suspended for a time, and firefighters were dispatched to at least 3 separate sites after shrapnel from intercepted munitions fell into residential neighborhoods. None of this happened in isolation. This war traces back to late February, when the United States and Israel launched military action against Iran, a war that has already claimed one of the most consequential lives in the region. Iran's own supreme leader at the time, Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the opening days of the conflict. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was named as his successor by Iran's Assembly of Experts roughly a week later, and it is Mojtaba, not his late father, who has been issuing Iran's statements throughout this latest escalation. By Al Jazeera's count, 16 American service members have been killed and more than 430 wounded since the war began. Friday's attack in Jordan added 2 more names to that toll and pushed this conflict past a threshold it had not crossed in months. And Kuwait was not the only target. According to Iranian state media, further strikes were also claimed against a U.S. base at Al-Azraq in Jordan and against Sheikh Issa Air Base in Bahrain, along with an intelligence data center there. The Revolutionary Guard also claimed, without independent confirmation, to have downed multiple U.S. aircraft during those attacks. That specific claim has not been verified by outside sources, so we are not treating it as fact, and we will not repeat unverified casualty or equipment loss figures from either side as though they are settled. Then there is the Strait of Hormuz itself. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Navy said it stopped 4 ships attempting to pass through the strait without authorization, and Washington has said any Iranian attempt to control the strait violates an earlier agreement between the 2 sides. That is not a side note. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply moves through that narrow stretch of water every single day, and even a temporary slowdown there tends to move markets faster than almost any other single geopolitical event. It is also worth stepping back on the wider timeline, because this did not start last week. This same war saw an earlier ceasefire attempt collapse only weeks ago, with strikes resuming and now escalating again over the past 8 nights. Since February, Iran has previously struck Kuwait International Airport and American positions inside Jordan multiple times, some of which only became public knowledge weeks after they happened. That pattern matters, because the true scale of this conflict has often only become clear well after the fact, and this weekend's events may not be fully understood for some time either. So why does any of this actually matter if you are not in the Gulf and you have no connection to the military? A few reasons, and none of them are abstract. First, energy prices. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important oil choke point on Earth. Tankers carrying crude from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, and the UAE all pass through it. Every time Iran signals it is willing to stop or search vessels there, oil markets react, and that reaction shows up at gas pumps and in shipping costs within days, not months. Shipping insurers also start adjusting premiums for Gulf routes almost immediately, and those costs eventually pass down to consumers. Second, the allies caught in the middle. Kuwait, Jordan, and Bahrain are not just hosting American troops as a favor. They are small, exposed states sitting next to a much larger conflict, and their own infrastructure, their airports, their power plants, their civilians, are now absorbing damage from a war they did not start and cannot fully control. That is how a two-country war keeps pulling in others, simply through geography and basing agreements signed long before any of this began. In Washington, some lawmakers are already warning that the war is moving faster than either government can fully steer. One senator described the pace of events over just the past few days as, in his words, getting very dark very quickly. Third, escalation logic. Wars like this rarely move in a straight line. They move in cycles: strike, retaliation, counter-retaliation, each one slightly bigger or wider than the last. 8 consecutive nights of American strikes, followed by Iranian strikes across 3 countries in a single weekend, followed by naval action in Hormuz, is not a pattern that stays still on its own. It either finds a ceiling or it does not, and right now there is no clear sign of which direction it is settling into. Now it is worth hearing both sides state their own case plainly, because that is the only real way to understand where this goes next. Rather than picking whichever version feels more familiar, the American position, through Central Command, is straightforward. The United States says its strikes are a direct response to an attack that killed its own soldiers, and that the broader campaign is aimed at stopping Iran from being able to threaten international shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. In Washington's framing, this is about protecting global energy security, defending its regional partners, and deterring further attacks on American personnel across the Gulf. Iran's position, through statements from its military and from Mojtaba Khamenei's office, is that its actions are retaliation for what it calls repeated American violations and aggression, and that striking American military infrastructure in the region is a direct response to strikes that have, by Al Jazeera's reporting, expanded to include civilian infrastructure inside Iran, including bridges and a desalination plant relied on for drinking water. Khamenei's statement on July 18th accused Washington of repeatedly violating the earlier agreement between the two countries. Both of those positions are self-serving, as you would expect from any party in an active conflict, but understanding both, without deciding in advance which one is right, is the only way to read what happens next without being caught off guard by it. So where does this go from here? There are a few plausible paths, and none of them are certain. One path is de-escalation through exhaustion, the same pattern that produced the earlier ceasefire attempt. Conflicts like this sometimes cool down, not because either side declares victory, but because continued strikes start costing more than they gain. That has happened once already in this exact war, though the fact it collapsed within weeks shows how fragile that kind of pause can be. A second path is continued strike and counterstrike at the current scale, action that stays contained to military targets in Iran, Kuwait, Jordan, and Bahrain, without a major jump into full-scale regional war. Several regional risk assessments treat this as the most likely near-term outcome, simply because it reflects what has already been happening for the past week, without a clear trigger for something bigger yet appearing on either side. A third and more serious path is further widening, if Iran follows through on any sustained disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, or if another American base takes a high-casualty hit like the one in Jordan. That kind of event could pull in other Gulf states or prompt a much larger American response. Analysts are watching Hormuz shipping data and any further personnel casualties as the two clearest signals of which direction this heads next. What we will not do here is guess which of those paths is coming, or attach a percentage to something that is not ours to predict. Nobody credible actually knows yet, including, frankly, the people making these decisions in real time on both sides. What we do know is this: 2 American families are grieving tonight, and a third is waiting for news of a missing service member. Kuwaiti civilians spent part of their weekend under air raid sirens, watching a power plant burn. And a war that already claimed one nation's supreme leader has now, 5 months later, pulled 4 countries into a single stretch of days. That is not a footnote. That is the story, and it is still being written in real time. We will be tracking how this develops, and we will be back with an update once there is something new, and independently verified to report, not before, and not based on a single side's claims alone. If you want the fuller picture of how this conflict has evolved since February, that context is available in our previous coverage on this channel. Subscribe if you want the next update the moment it is confirmed, not the moment it is rumored.